Hola a todas y a todos en esta segunda entrega del ciclo de ODS, de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenibles de la ONU que organiza Casa Árabe, y en concreto este que va a adentrarse en el mundo de la salud mental, algo que nos parece realmente importante y trascendental para el desarrollo humano de la región de Oriente Medio y Norte de África. Esta sesión se va a desarrollar en su totalidad en inglés, que es la lengua franca, el idioma que comparten nuestros invitados de hoy. Hemos querido justamente buscar expertos sobre el terreno que pudiesen hablarnos de algo tan específico y tan importante, digamos, de tener ese contacto con el terreno. Y vamos a estar en contacto con el Cairo, con la Franja de Gaza y con Portugal. So, good morning and welcome to Casa Árabe Online Debates. This second session of our cycle on sustainable development goals set by the United Nations is dedicated to mental health in the Arab countries, to poor health outcomes, premature death, human rights violations, and global and national economic loss. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has recognized this by the inclusion of mental health in the Sustainable Development Goals. The vision of the WHO Special Initiative for Mental Health, to be developed in the 2019-2023 period, is that all people achieve the highest standards of mental health and well-being. To implement this initiative over 5 years, the WHO aims to raise $60 million. But how will this spill over in the world, considering the inequalities that persist? In particular, given the difficult circumstances for many people in the Arab world, we felt it was important to delve into this specific dimension of public health and how it may affect development. We are currently suffering a worldwide pandemic, and the Arab countries are certainly not immune to it. According to an article published in Current Opinion in Psychiatry back in 2005, mental health patients in Arab countries tend to express their psychological problems in terms of physical symptoms, thereby avoiding the stigma attached to mental illness. They also tend to underutilize mental health services and to hold negative attitudes toward formal mental health services. Reliance upon religion or religious leaders as a means of coping with mental health issues is another prevalent theme in the Arab world. Another issue is that of mental health practices in politically volatile and violent regions where higher rates of mental health problems and psychiatric diagnosis have been found. In addition, women in Arab and Muslim countries are at paramount risk from mental health problems. Poverty, lack of employment, wars, conflicts, the rise of fundamentalism and terrorism are currently plaguing much of the Arab region, something which seems to be at the root of many of the mental and behavioral illnesses that we'll talk about. In terms of statistics, the mental health expenditure as a percentage of total health expenditure is not available in most Arab countries. A study published in the Journal of World Psychiatry in 2012 mentioned that only 3 Arab countries provided an estimate: Qatar 1%, Egypt less than 1%, and Palestine 2.5%. The same study showed a very low number of psychiatric nurses, from 23 for 100,000 inhabitants in Bahrain to 0.09 in Yemen for the same 100,000 inhabitants. Yet not are all bad news, it would seem. Recent years have seen significant changes in the field of mental health in the countries of the Arab region. Psychiatric services, which were earlier totally confined to a few large mental hospitals, are now gradually being replaced by psychiatric units with both inpatient and outpatient facilities in general hospitals. Nevertheless, according to the Arab Youth Survey 2009, published by the communications company Asda'a BCW based in the Emirates. Half of Arab youth think there is a stigma around medical care for mental health issues. We know recent statistics indicate that 2/3 of the Arab region's population is below 30 years of age, half of which fall within the 15-29 year age bracket. Around 30% of original population of 370 million. That is above 110 million youngsters. And they are particularly vulnerable to addiction, anxiety, and depression. So, with all this in mind, and in order to evaluate the impact that mental health is causing to the development of Arab countries, we have invited 3 experts who work closely on the matter and on the ground. Sally Toma is an Egyptian-British psychiatrist based in Cairo. She currently works in several community care private mental health clinics, offering individual, coupled, and group sessions. She previously headed Médecins du Monde's mission to Egypt as its medical coordinator, where she focused on the integration of mental health into primary health services through a stepped care approach. She trained many medical staff and psychosocial workers of both the Ministry of Health in Egypt and many national and international NGOs on psychosocial interventions within the community. Thank you for joining us from Cairo, Sally. Sabah al-khair. Yasser Abu Jama is Executive Director of the Gaza Community Mental Health Program. He brings a special interest in neuropsychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, advocacy, and policy change to the Gaza Community Mental Health Program, which was founded in 1990 by Dr. Iyad Sarraj and is the leading non-governmental Palestinian organization providing mental health services to people living in the Gaza Strip. GCMHP, those are the initials of the Gaza program, has been central to this process in Gaza after each of the 3 large-scale Israeli assaults on Gaza in 2008, 2012, 2014, helping the community to work through both collective and individual trauma. Thank you, Dr. Yasser, for joining us from Gaza. And Ana Marquez is mental health advisor for Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, since 2015. She holds a psychology degree from the University of Lisbon, a master's degree in palliative care from the University of Valladolid, and a postgraduate diploma in applied positive psychology from the University of Lisbon. She's also a family therapist, and she has worked as a civil servant in the fields of human resources, occupational health, and welfare services, providing psychological support to individuals and families. She joins us from Portugal, but she's normally based in Amman, Jordan. So many thanks to the 3 of you for agreeing to take part in this virtual roundtable. We'll start with Ana Marquez. We want to hear from an NGO such as Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, who work on the ground and tackle many humanitarian crises, therefore with a wide experience in the region. So my first question is, since when have you included the mental health dimension as part of your work, and what is your current assessment of the region?
So MSF started to work on mental health programs. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me and for being here and to be in such a great panel with people with such great experience and speaking about something that I'm so passionate. Thank you so much. But going back to the question, I think MSF started to work in mental health programs in '99, around that, in the War of the Balkans. Then, in terms of Middle East, we started working in Middle East in the early 2000s, 2003, 2003, in Palestine, in Hebron, with a program of victims of violence. Since then, and for MSF Spain, which is the one that I'm working more, we have programs in Syria, we have in Palestine, we have in Yemen, and we have in Turkey. We support an NGO in Turkey. Other MSF sections have also in Egypt, in Jordan, in Iraq, in Libya, if we want also to consider the MENA region, in Lebanon. So we have been working in Middle East and in many countries for several years, MSF, all MSF sections and all MSF movement. What is our analysis of the reason why? Well, we are there, as you probably understand, and as you explained, there is a very high prevalence of mental conditions in Middle East. Recently, for example, in the Middle East medical portal, for something that people, it's very accessible, they were posting a study saying that in Middle East there are the highest rates of depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and suicide. So something that it's very devastating and very severe for the population, that has very severe impact on the lives of people themselves and individuals, but also on families and on communities. Our assessment is pretty much in line with this. So in terms, for example, of figures of what is relevant in terms of figures, amongst MSF patients, more than 50% suffer from depression. And then everything also very correlated with war and violence, PTSD, stress, acute stress, adjustment disorder, and so on and so on. Obviously, these are the prevalences, so these are the diagnoses, but what we see in the field, it's way beyond the diagnosis, and what we see in the field and why we are there, it's because of the cumulative impact of violence in the places where we work. And as you know, for example, Syria, Palestine, Yemen, we are no longer even speaking about the war, but we are speaking about protracted conflict. So people who have been living in war and conflict for many years, and this obviously has an impact. And what it's also relevant beyond the war and the violence coming from war itself, it's the indirect costs of violence, the indirect costs of war and conflict, and other forms of violence that also come a lot from war and conflict. And this we see in our daily work with our patients, with the families that we have around, not just in mental health, because we also have medical activities. We see in every phase that we face in Middle East, and we have people that lost livelihoods, that no longer can provide for their families. This is highly stressful for them. Defragmented social communities that went apart, that no longer have family around, no longer have their neighbors around, and this is extremely tough. Other forms of violence, very, very extreme: rape, mass murder, mass rape. So all of this is very impactful, and also situations of exclusion and discrimination and more violence to already very vulnerable groups like children, like unaccompanied minors, elderly. So this is very severe. There is something that I think we have been seeing also increasing in Middle East, has an indirect impact of war, which is the increasing gender-based violence, especially targeting women and girls, but also we have been seeing, especially in the last months, more boys and more young adult men coming to us and asking for help and asking for psychological support. But SGBV, it's very severe, and we see there are always the shadow of honor killings, genital mutilation, rape, child marriages, even if families do it with a good purpose of protection, of protecting their girls, but obviously this has an impact on their mental health. It's something that also we have been seeing more and more is inside this gender-based violence, the case of domestic violence that is increasing. There is already a lot of research saying that when there is war and conflict, and in Middle East, where men have this role of being breadwinners and the protectors of families, that some of them feel their roles shift, no? So they feel very disempowered, and a way of responding for some of them, obviously very few of them, but obviously also with a big impact on their families, it's intrafamily violence and inter-partner violence. We still fall short. We know we still fall short, but this is something that we have been seeing, and we want to invest more and more. On another level, I think what also, in terms of this assessment of Middle East, is the stigma. There is still a big stigma on looking for mental health care in the population. But we can also see that it becomes better. After we work in a place, after 1 year, 2 years of working in a place, the population becomes much more open, and they come more and more to seek for help and to ask for this. So working in Middle East in mental health is also a matter of time and gaining the trust of the population, for them to understand that we want to provide, and our aim is really to provide quality care. Last but not the least, as you were saying, lack of investment still on mental health, much better than before, but still lack on investment. Thank you.
I'm sure we'll come. Thank you very much, Anna, and we'll come back to some of the points you have raised: the stigma, the investment, the way it impacts on development. But I'm going to move to the Gaza Strip with Dr. Yasser Abu Jama. You live in one of the hardest territories in the Arab world, the Gaza Strip, under Israeli occupation, and with very high levels of unemployment, poverty, a population who has undergone several traumas and divisions within their own population. Your center has concluded that 97.5% of children in the age 10 to 19 age group have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So what are your main priorities if your everyday work seems to be an emergency?
Thank you very much for the panel. I am really, I hope that it will be of benefit. Thank you for the very important question. We have such high rate of symptoms among children because the exposure level is really high. When we speak about, for example, the last offenses on Gaza Strip that took place in 2014, it continues for about 51 days. During those 51 days, we used to hear bombardments every now and then during the day, during the night. And according, for example, to some Israeli media, more than 60,000 shillings were falling on Gaza during those 51 days, which is about like 1,000 bombs per day. And you imagine that Gaza Strip is a very small geographical area. It's about 40 kilometers in length and about 14 to 16 kilometers in width. So the exposure is really level is high, and with that exposure, means to feel safe and secure are not really there. You don't have shelters, you don't have means of feeling safe, So you continue for 51 days to feel that you are insecure, that anyone can get killed at any moment. International organizations found that in many reports that more than 75% of the people who got injured or wounded, they were just simply civilians, just being, let me say, not in the right place, which could be just their homes. They were just exposed by a chance to the shelling or got killed or got wounded. So when we work with the population, especially after this kind of emergency, we have to work at multi-level. One of the main issues is to try to offer help immediately to the people who are in need. And this could be through applying psychological first aid through our mobile teams, for example, or this could be through offering toll-free telephone counseling, so anyone can call. Our toll-free line can simply receive basic advice, or in case that there are more serious symptoms, then people are more than welcome to come and join us or visit us at our community centers. So one of the main issues is to try to offer help to the people who are in need, who were really traumatized or who were experiencing or having some symptoms. The other thing is it's central when you speak about 2 million people living in this small geographical area, then the impact is beyond the capacity of any mental health institution or an Ministry of Health or any type of intervention, having in mind the scarcity of resources that we have in Gaza Strip. So to be able to overcome that, you need to have a huge public awareness raising campaigns. You need to educate the population at large on what does it mean to be traumatized, what does it mean to feel fear, what does it mean that sometimes women have low back pain, they have pains in their stomachs and their abdomen, their knees, sometimes children. Of course, sometimes it's obvious when a child wakes up and screams in the middle of the night because he saw something that reminded him of what happened. It's obvious that this is a trauma, or this is a symptom of trauma. But sometimes things are not very clear to the parents, the family. For example, why the child started bedwetting, for example, why they are wetting their beds in the morning. This is something unusual, especially for children who are 8 or 9 or 10. Why sometimes children tend to be irritable. By what I mean irritable, they can't stand still, they keep moving around. Sometimes their behavior really change and to the wrong behavior. What I mean by the wrong behavior, for example, they stop listening to their parents. And sometimes, especially after such devastating times, parents start to become more angry. Why you are not listening to me, to us? And then you get into some problems. Well, parents need to understand that this is also some manifestations of trauma, especially among children. The other very important aspect, which all the time keep in mind and we use actually, is that you need to invest in the society. You need to train as many people as possible. You need to train as many community-based organizations, those basic stuff, for example, teachers, sometimes, psychologists with basic education, social workers. You need to educate as many people as possible in how they could intervene and help as soon as possible. And the main things that they need to learn is to understand the symptoms really, and to deliver the right message to the parents, and to offer simple help. And then they can, of course, know what to do and what case need to be referred, and to which center or which place they could be referred. So these are the main 3 tactics that I could think that we wanted. This is a huge work when it comes to an organization that is working in a place where 2 million people are in the biggest open-air prison, as we say in the world, and exposed to such large-scale attacks.
Yes, you work under very, very tough circumstances, and this is why we also were very keen on speaking to you, because I think it really shows the impact of what mental health can be in a population under very tough circumstances. And we'll be coming back to what the role of training and education. Now we move to Cairo, where it's a very sunny early afternoon. Sally, Toma, we are about to start reflecting on the 10-year anniversary of the Arab Springs. It is no secret that the depth of the marginalization that young people suffer, and predominantly that security-based approach to responding to demands for change, they have brought about a sense of despair and depression among many of the activists who were involved back then. How do you think this has affected the psyche of those disenfranchised, and especially women? In your CV, your biography, you stress your experience as a feminist and a revolutionary socialist who took part in the Egyptian 2011 uprising and the aftermaths, in which you have worked with collective and individual trauma in general, and specifically women survivors of violence, and helping them in areas like women's rights issues or empowerment or their mental health. So how has this affected, if we can do a sort of like a balance of what has happened 10 years on to the psyche of young people in Egypt?
First of all, thank you for having me. And yeah, when we start talking a bit about the collective psyche or the psyche of the Egyptians, I sort of see it like I always say this is trauma land we are currently living in. We are stuck somewhere between the reckons and the dreams, not being able to move on. Not being able to cope with the defeat, practically, more or less. 10 years on, this is sort of a defeat for revolution, the presence of a very strong counter-revolution as well. And when you think about a psyche or a collective psyche that is stuck somewhere, not having closure, not having the opportunity to actually move on, or actually the opportunity for us to transform the wounds into scars even, we are still subjected to the ongoing of traumatic events and incidents, to the ongoing of violence and oppression. So actually it's sort of being stuck, because the youth, they want to move on, they want to continue to dream, but it's a bit being stuck between the dreams and the reckons, like the funeral of all this. So the wound is still open. I see some hope. We'll talk about this a bit later on. But yeah, the wound is still open. And with it, of course, comes all sorts of mental health struggles. So with such a traumatic collective and individual, you have a surge in addictions like never before, of course. Suicide rate, although suicide is generally also more among men than women, because they don't have the ability or the access to seek mental health services easier. But we also seen a surge in many female activists, and we recently had the suicide of Sarah Higazi, who committed suicide in Canada. She belongs to the LGBT community, who was very oppressed and discriminated against, and yeah, she suicided in exile, actually. We also have a lot of domestic issues, physical issues as well. Sometimes they're not, people are not able to express their mental health struggles through, you know, their psyche, so it's easier to maybe express it through the physical issues. So we have a surge in that. It's an extremely anxious society, more or less, very violent, very depressed. More or less, also when we talk about those in confinement, solitary confinement, we have a lot of political prisoners, and especially those in solitary confinement, they're struggling a lot, of course, with sensory deprivation and psychosis even, and it takes a long time to rehabilitate them once they're out. So this is also a big problem, because we don't have access to them in prisons. Definitely, they don't have access to anything regarding also the prison population, which is high in Egypt. So overall, we can say that the psyche is crushed, but what I also am focusing on is more the women's psyche, or the women survivors of all this violence, because of course, in general, women here are more morally excluded from anything. Our problem is not only with the state, actually, it is this hegemony of the masculinity in a way. So we even struggle with this among activists and among the activist population and society, for women to actually push through and fight through all the issues and the moral exclusion. On this end, I see hope, because what's happening recently is a big push towards women pushing back for their rights, against the harassment and against such exclusion. And with it comes, of course, the LGBT and the youth in general, because if we talk about intersectionality of oppression and discrimination and all, you'll find that women, youth, and LGBT and of course political prisoners come within the bottom of the bottom. So everyone is in a pit in Egypt now, but we are at the very, very low bottom. So I think the fight is to keep climbing up, and this is what we're seeing in a way. So it's a bit stuck between, yeah, should we call it a day and it's over, or be a bit inspired and keep the flame to continue with the revolution, inside at least.
Thank you, Sally. That is definitely a difficult place to be in. This trauma land that you've described, and the fact that you haven't been able to close some of those open wounds. I'm sure we'll go back to that again later on. We're going to move to round two of our questions, and back to Anna for a general overview. What are the types of treatment you have envisaged for the countries? We know, especially in Casa Árabe, we always try to say that, you know, the Arab world, there's no such thing as one solution for the Arab world. There's no such thing. I mean, we use it obviously to simplify some of the issues, and definitely there are things that these countries share that they have in common, but not everyone is the same. So have you identified different strategies according to specific traits or characteristics of the societies you work with?
I think the best way to start my answer is exactly reinforcing what you just said. There are big links between the different Arabic countries, but they are very different amongst each other. And whenever we get to a place, the first thing is really to consider what is the place and to do an adjustment of our programs. I cannot tell you that we identify traits. Obviously, we identify bigger needs in places or others according to that. And that's why one of our main concerns, no, it's not just a concern, it's a must. Whenever we go to a place, first step is to do an assessment and to see what are the needs, how the population is seeking some kind of mental health care, which usually in Middle East will be family or be traditional and religious leaders, to see what are the main symptoms, how the population, what kind of symptoms reveal that they have a mental health condition, and we try to see it across the groups. As Dr. Yasser was saying, we have to see it in children, we have to see it in adults, we have to see across the different groups and specific vulnerable groups, as I was telling you. And then according to that and according to what the population is also telling us that they need and makes sense for them. And this is a big part also of our work, because it's not just us coming as an international organization and putting a model in place and opening a service like a shop and people will start coming. So this conversation with the population on what makes sense for them is a big part of the equation. So after this assessment, we try to put a model, a program, a strategy in place for mental health, which is very specific for that place. It's very specific for that catchment area, for that population, and for the subpopulations inside. Because even in a region or in a locality, we cannot speak about a population. We have many times very different populations that we have to attend and we have to respond to. After this, so we designed the program and we put it in place. I can tell you that what happens across mental health in Middle East, but also beyond that, is we try to have what we call the pyramid of mental health interventions in place. So at the very basis, we try to advocate for people to have basic needs and security ensured. And as you can imagine, this is a huge struggle in many of the places that we work in. We know that mental health is effective when this is in place, but still in many places it's not. It compromises our work. So we provide some kind of care at this level, but we also advocate a lot with governments, with other organizations to provide this. Then on a second level, and as was said before, we need to work a lot on awareness, on educating the population on what is mental health, why do we sometimes develop some symptoms, what can we do to deal with these symptoms, and if not, how can they seek for help. It's a very big prevention level. We work a lot with groups here. And then we have the third level where we already see people that have some symptoms and need some help. We usually have professionals who are not psychiatrists or psychologists, or people who are trained on specific, very structured models of care, and they can help people with very mild symptoms. And then we have the peak of the pyramid in terms of specialized care. So care provided for people who have moderate to severe mental health conditions, and that is provided by psychologists, psychiatrists, and doctors with training on psychiatric care. So this is more or less what we try to go across this pyramid, and we try to go from prevention to very specialized care. Sometimes we don't need, because there is another organization providing, and it's fine. In terms more clinically speaking, we more and more focus, we try to train our teams on trauma models of care, because this is what we see in Middle East, that is the biggest need. And then it also differs a lot across the region. In some places we need to focus more on torture, and we have very specific models for that. I can tell you, for example, in Turkey, this is our focus. In Palestine, we focus a lot on victims of violence, a lot on sexual violence, more and more. In Yemen, we focus a lot on the general conflict, on how it's also integrated with medical care. In Syria, also kind of the same. So it differs a lot, but I cannot speak about a specific trait, because it really depends on what we find in the field at a specific moment, because it also changes over time.
Clearly, there's not a formula to be applied, and as you say, the context changes also very quickly, and with the amount of conflicts, and then conflicts within the conflicts, then it makes it even more difficult to, as I say, to find a formula. But I think it was quite well explained, your methodology. So moving on to Gaza, as I mentioned before at the beginning, we perceive that the governments devote, or it's actually documented that the governments generally devote a very scarce amount, if any, of their national budgets to mental health care. Dr. Yasser, it seems that Palestinians stand out in these efforts, despite the limits in their resources. So is there more awareness, you think, there, and why? And also, thinking about the region, are you able to exchange your experiences with other colleagues in the region who might benefit from your expertise, your experience?
Thank you very much. This is a very important question, but part of the answer is the length of the conflict, let me say. When you speak about more than 70 years that of people who were uprooted from their homes, and now they are living refugees. In Gaza Strip, more than 2/3 of the population of the 2 million people, which is like almost 1.4 million people, are refugees who live in Gaza Strip. When you speak about being under occupation since more than 50 years, when you speak about the first intifada and then the second intifada and now the blockade, and at the same time exposure to 3 large-scale operations or offensives in 2008, 2012, 2014. So it's a long history. It's also a long story of events that happen every now and then that seriously affect or impact the mental health well-being and the psyche of the population. Now, let's keep in mind that this experience is felt by almost everyone in Palestine, whether in Gaza Strip or the West Bank, because simply during the first intifada, everyone participated. Now everyone in Gaza was exposed to the attacks in 2008, 2012, 2014. So there is a collective, let me say, sense of like everyone almost had or went through that event that led to some impact and led to a communal understanding that there is a need to intervene, that there is a need for psychological support, that there is a need for treatment. And now this is part of it. The other part of it is that the needs are really huge. When we started GCMHP, as you said, in 1990, actually there were, among the people who were coming to our community centers, all of them, they were referred by primary healthcare physicians. I mean, none was referred by himself or herself, or family referred. Nowadays, about 70% or even a little bit more than that are coming by themselves, which means that people are seeing less stigma, feeling less stigma. They are more aware of the conditions around them. They more understand the implications of trauma. They more understand what does it mean to be traumatized, what does it mean to be depressed, and they are more open to help. And of course, when there is more of the expressed need, then there should be a response, and that's why I think that we are in a better condition when it comes to how we spend on mental health than some countries in the region. However, still, I think this is not enough. We do not need to compare, for example, only and to be proud because we are ahead of some of the countries, but we need to look at it at the worldwide, for example, we need to know, for example, how many psychiatrists work in Gaza Strip among those 2 million people, less than 20 psychiatrists among those 2 million people. How many people generally can provide specialized care, as Anna said, at the tip of the pyramid, less than 9 mental health centers and 1 psychiatric hospital. Imagine in the whole Gaza Strip, there is only 1 psychiatric hospital that has only 30 beds that offers inpatient to people with trauma. So yes, we are in a better condition when it comes to awareness about the need for mental health interventions. We have more cooperation with the decision makers. There is more understanding of the needs of the population. And then the people really show at the community centers, which means that there is a need that people need to respond to. However, still there are many things to be ahead of us. And one of the main challenges that we have is that the condition is really a protracted one. No matter how much you put in that resources, your researches will continue to be needed. Each second or third year, we are facing a problem. We're facing a huge event that is impacting the population. And 2 years ago, in 2018, it was the Great March of Return. Now it's the pandemic, which is for the whole world, and we don't know what's going to be ahead of us. So this is the case for the other countries in the region. It's very important to raise awareness. They look at it from the, internationally, people look at it from the impact, the impairment, how much does it affect economy. But when you speak about health in the year 2020, we speak about a human rights approach. So each individual has his right to receive good health, including mental health. And this applies to each individual in any place in the region, whether this is in Palestine or Egypt or in Jordan or wherever, So it's important to be able to offer this help whenever it's needed. It's also very important to make people understand the symptoms and where they should seek treatment. Thank you.
Thank you. Now moving to Sally in Cairo. Some countries like Kuwait or Saudi Arabia have made campaigns with the clear goal of enhancing the treatment of these kind of issues by introducing mental health laws and policies, working on the stigma that surrounds it. Egypt, being the largest country demographically, should set an example. And we know there is in Ain Shams University a very important institute of psychiatry led by Dr. Okasha. But have you any indicators that show some kind of improvement, or even in the attitudes towards the stigma surrounding mental health?
Okay, before I get to the indicators and what Egypt is specific, I wanted to add something to what Anna was saying. When we were talking about that every place in the Middle East has its own nature and the own circumstances where we can actually function and work. One of the problems, like in Egypt currently, which is the negative shift first, before I talk about the positive one. For instance, MSF or MDM, currently those in Egypt are actually not working with Egyptians to begin with. So they are only allowed to work with the refugees. And this tells us a lot. It tells us a lot that the Egyptian state itself refuses to actually confess or identify the fact that there are problems among the Egyptian population. It's sort of the same mentality of no, we have no problems, we're good, everything is fine, everything is working well in Egypt, please don't interfere. So they see whatever MSF or MDM, for instance, would be doing in Egypt as interference. So you're only allowed to function within the refugees fund, actually, or which is something that will promote Egypt when it comes to the EU or whatever funds Egypt gets in general. So this is also a bit of an obstacle. Before I just move on to the to answering your question. When it comes to Egypt, I think Egypt has like the oldest infrastructure for health in general in the region. So it has great infrastructure that is actually ready to be working in full capacity to serve the Egyptian people. So for instance, when I was heading the Médecins du Monde as the medical coordinator here in Egypt, we actually designed a project which meant the integration of mental health services into the primary health sector. Because the issue with Egypt, yes, we have good hospital base, yes, we have psychiatrists, yes, you have good inpatient capacity in a way, like in relation to other countries in the region. But our biggest problem is actually that we don't have access for all. So we don't have rights for people to access mental health services without paying a fee, which is something they do for family medicine, for instance. So the project was actually based on integrating mental health services into the primary health sector. And we had something like 2,100 primary health units in Egypt that could be actually utilized to receive Egyptians for things like depression or an anxiety, at least. Like there was also a push back then to push for some specific medications, like very light antidepressants that could be accessed by Egyptians without the need to wait for it to deteriorate enough to go into tertiary care, or as you said, sometimes there is secondary care within the outpatient capacity, but it's also based in a hospital. So this is what we've done for. Well, actually, we managed to pilot around 9 primary health centers that were receiving Egyptians for the stepped care approach, like on a community level first, and then we escalate with intensity of intervention depending on the problem. And we trained nurses, social workers, and doctors as well to be working on mental health from this perspective. But just like everything else in Egypt, actually, this whole project ended with the funds, which lasted 3 years, and there was no sustainability or anything to build on. And not even that, MDM then had to move from this sort of project into just refugee confined sort of projects, which are also very important, but do not serve the idea that we were talking about the infrastructure. So yes, there are places like Okasha Institute and also the Rakhawi and many institutes currently that are actually working on maybe expanding the access to mental health services through also having more psychologists and more nurses and more staff that could work on community levels. And also a positive thing that actually happened during the Corona thing is that, and I was part of, and I really value and cherish the opportunity, is actually that we were offering Egyptians online Corona and anxiety support groups, actually. So, and it was coordinated by the General Secretariat and the Ministry of Health. So any Egyptian would have access to 7 sessions of group therapy actually regarding their anxieties around Corona. And it's still working till now, and it's been going for like 4 months now. And I'm part of it, and I value this. And we have been discussing the same thing, that maybe we can try to move from just the Corona and anxiety to bigger issues like grief or trauma or an anxiety in general. So I think there is also a shift towards that. Most of the shift, of course, is pushed by civil society in general and pushed by us psychiatrists and psychologists as volunteers, but there is a big push that is happening, and maybe also some pressuring on the mental health entity or the health ministry in general to push for that at least, because apart from that, Egyptians have no place to channel whatever they're going through.
Well, at least one thing that the coronavirus pandemic would have contributed to is this access somehow, and as you say, maybe within all those calls for just something specific that relates to the corona issue, they may be other parts of the illnesses or the behavioral problems that may be tackled under that umbrella. Oh.
This part. Actually, I think that we have 2011 uprisings to thank for that, because I think there has been also a massive shift in Egypt regarding the stigma to mental health issues. And this is because mainly the youth see it in a different way, so they are pushing for it in a different way. We have a lot of ads over the radio and TV now regarding mental health, small little things and maybe successes, but it's we're getting there. So specifically with stigma, I think things are getting much better in Egypt.
Good. We're going to change slightly the order of appearance, and I'm going to go to Dr. Yasser Abu Jama. I'd like to, I mean, you have mentioned PTSD, and you have mentioned several issues, several symptoms, sorry, that the children develop. But I'd really like, because we very seldom have the opportunity to talk about children in the region. I'd like you probably to develop a bit more how to tackle PTSD in children. We know that the conflicts, the bombings, the shellings are obviously affecting them, but is there a possibility to improve their quality of life, or I don't know if to cure PTSD, is that possible? Can you just elaborate a bit on the work you do with the children?
Yeah, this is another very important issue. First of all, children show different symptoms regarding the traumatic event. Some of them appear immediately, some of them take some time to appear. Some of them are just, just normal reactions. How come you will not be scared or terrified if a bomb falls near you, or if you hear a bombing within your neighborhood? The normal reactions that it really should affect you, it should impact you, you should worry about your health, your life, etc., etc. However, sometimes these progress to become more less normal, and to become towards impairment, problems with functions. The severity of the symptoms start to become more. Then you have recollections of the traumatic event having in one scene, in one way or the other, whether this is through dreaming, night terrors, or various pains that the children appear, or simply, as I said, bedwetting. And then comes the question, and sometimes severe conditions like dissociations, like psychosis, even can happen. Depends upon the loss. It depends upon the level of damage. Once you were exposed, or you are exposed to a traumatic event, trauma is there. You cannot take a rubber and just remove it or clear it from your mind. It's just there. What you need to do is to try to make the children go on with their lives, and this applies also to adults. One of the central issues that we try our best, and this happens in full cooperation with the parents, with the family, is to try to restore the normal life of the life rhythm, lifestyle of the child. Sometimes people are displaced, sometimes families, in the last attacks in 2014, more than 500,000 people were displaced from their homes, which is like 25% of the population. More than 100,000 people didn't have their homes to return to. They were destroyed. Their residences were destroyed. So one of the immediate things is to start to, as much as possible, to restore the daily life functioning. This includes the life rhythm. This includes, waking up. This includes going to schools. This includes going to sleep, etc., etc., etc. Now, with that, of course, you will find some issues and some problems. One of the main things that we used to do in our community centers, of course, there are different modalities of treating children with post-traumatic stress disorder. What we apply and we feel very effective is art therapy. It's mainly drawing. This is a very important part of it, or it could be also psychodrama for children. Sometimes children do not tell their stories. They are afraid to tell it, or they are not sure what to say. So sometimes the drawing comes as the way that children show their fears, and sometimes the drawing are just some recollections or flashbacks of what they have seen or what they were exposed to. And through those drawings, children start to speak about their fears, about their emotions, and try to get rid of them one way or the other. The other issue is play therapy. You get a child into a playroom that is full of toys, and she decides not to go to play with dolls, not to go to play with Logo, for example, but she decides to go and pick a tank or an air fighter, because these are all in the play therapy room. And she then starts, or he then starts to show what really happened, how the event, try to reconstruct the event that she was exposed to, and then you understand where the fears come from, and then you start to try to help the child overcome that trauma and move on with her life. This is something that we try our best, but what's central to the success of the therapy is the involvement of the parents, the involvement of the family, their understanding of what the children are going through, and the necessity for the parents to be proactive when it comes to the treatment modalities for the children. You see the children twice per week, each time for half to 1 hour, but their whole day, their whole week is with their families. Another very important thing is sometimes, we parents, adults, sometimes our behavior intends the fear of the children, So sometimes when you see that there is a drone in the sky, and the skies in Gaza are full of drones all the time, unfortunately, even nowadays when it's considered calm. Sometimes parents would really terrify the children by just looking into the sky and saying, look, the drones are here, they are going there, they might bump here, they might bump there. So some of the work that we do as adults just make things worse. And that's why a big part of what we are doing is, again, as I said, educating the population, speaking more and more about how they should deal with their children. Another very important issue, which is that, to try to avoid as much as possible another traumatic event. And in Gaza, how you could avoid that? It's almost impossible to avoid that. But what you could do is that you work with the child, and this is another example. Let's try and find out a safe place in our home. You live in a place that is in this small geographical area that any bomb can fall at any time, but you still work with the child on finding a safe place. Which room is the safest room? So when you feel that something is wrong, or when they are terrified, or when there is a shelling, because it happens almost every night, and then you hear some bomb falling here or there by artillery or something like that. So where is the safe room? So everyone can go to that safe place and feel that, okay, we are safe. So part of it is really a specialized work that is made through well-trained psychologists and psychiatrists, and part of it is really, and a very important part of it, comes through the understanding of the parents. How could we be of help to the children? Fortunately, a lot of the children who are exposed to traumatic events, they really recover. Children tend to recover well and a lot faster and sooner than us adults. The unfortunate thing is that, it's not once and it's over. For example, in 2014, our remote teams or mobile teams were visiting the families, and sometimes the neighborhoods are bumped every now and then. They were bumped in 2008, then in 2012, then in 2014. And one of it was a female psychologist, actually. We go in pairs, a man and a woman. We visit the neighborhoods. And suddenly a young Well, she was an adolescent girl. She just appeared from nowhere, from the ashes, and started running into the lab of the psychologist. And she told her, well, I'm waiting for you, because you came and helped me years ago, if you remember me from the first war. Now our house is bombed for the second time, and I was wondering when you are going to appear. And that was something very interesting to hear, that the children really understand what happened and expect help, and that they value that help, and that it works. The message here is that it works. Healing work. But again, the thing that we lack, and I end with that, is that all the time, in order to reprocess traumatic events and move on with your life, you need space, you need safety, you need security. And this is, unfortunately, to the moment, it's not really 100% available in the environment in Gaza Strip. Every now and then, we hear or we see cues of the traumatic events that remind the children of what happened to them earlier, that make sometimes healing processes more difficult, slower, and sometimes even, unfortunately, cause relapse.
Yes, definitely the context in which you live under the circumstances are far from that 100% of possibilities to make a safe environment, definitely, and therefore you don't have the let's say the luxury of the safe space you need over the time you need as well for healing. So we move to Sally Toma in Cairo. You have focused on your work on survivors of state torture and the rights of Egyptians to transitional justice and reparations. All this sounds very delicate to do under the current political restrictions. How do you go about it?
I think just like Dr. Yasser said, yeah, it is it's a big challenge to be able to treat trauma or even help with moving on if the wound is still open and if you're still subjected to the same triggering events and traumatic events. And it doesn't give a big space for healing, unfortunately. It is extremely challenging and difficult working under the current restrictions, especially that everything in Egypt now is seen as a state security issue. So if you want to treat these people, this is a state security threat. If you, for instance, like the LGBT community is one of the worst hit, because in attempting to actually support them, then you are breaking the moral code of the Egyptian state, for instance. So you have this. You have recently seen, I don't know if you heard about it, we call them the TikTok women. So these were just women on TikTok doing the sort of singing or dancing and whatever everyone was doing all over the world on TikTok during the Corona thing. And what happened is that many of them were persecuted, actually, and they are now on a sentence, like 3-year sentence in prison, just because these women broke the morality of the Egyptian family, whatever the morality of the Egyptian family is. So it is very difficult to support such things, because these women are now subjected to severe trauma. They've done nothing but just appear on social media doing their own right to freedom and fun. So this is very challenging as well. The issue with torture or state torture that continues to happen, the oppression, the injustices. Even during the time I was with Médecins du Monde, as part of the marginalized community I was trying to work with, was accessing prisons, for instance. I was never given a security clearance to access prisons, and we were threatened a lot by, bringing down the project completely if we go about wanting to help people in prisons. So the idea is, in a whole, this is a patriarchal society, so they use the patriarchy to oppress the freedoms of most Egyptians, really. And this is why the youth, women, those in politics, and the LGBT will be the most targeted and the most difficult to help. So it is a struggle, but I think that the key, maybe when it comes to what Dr. Yasser was saying and our own situation as well, is resilience. So what we try to do is actually we focus on the resilience. We can't treat the trauma because it's not a safe place to treat the trauma anyway. But what we can do is actually try to push for resilience by all means, is just continuing till maybe the tides turn and something happens to shift the status quo. So as I said before, this is all based on civil society attempts to push with resilience, to be the voice of the marginalized. Of course, civil society is under attack as well, and continuously under attack in Egypt because it's seen as the enemy of the state now. But there are small little maneuvers or areas where we can actually start maneuvering, which is something like mental health, for instance, is health workers speaking out more, being more active generally, because now other activists cannot talk or speak or push for anything. So I think this is the time for us to focus on specific marginalized groups and work on it as case basis. Like, for instance, we take the women's issues and push for it and have a big campaign regarding that. Same with the youth, same when it was the LGBT issue being pushed through, and just try to come at it from a different place that patriarchy won't be focusing very much on it, because I think that's the only way to work being off their radar, because apart from that, there is no other way. They are on it and they are focusing, and Big Brother is here and will not allow anything to go outside whatever they see as functioning or system. So I'm thinking resilience is the way to go, and this is what civil society is trying to promote within a mental health perspective and capacity for us to be able to survive whatever Egypt has been going through for a very long time now.
Thank you. Resilience against Big Brother. Anna, I had a question, but you have kind of more or less answered it. That was regarding the different sort of like treatments and if they needed to be adapted to the social cultural conditions. So with that, I will ask my last question. What can NGOs such as MSF achieve that are out of the hands of either national governments or local actors? What margin of maneuver do you have?
Well, we always have to work within the margins of maneuver that are given us from governments, as Sally was very well pointing out, and this sometimes is a strength and sometimes it's a limitation. No, so we always have to work within how the government allows us. I think what we better bring are two issues. One is advocacy. I think we have, and for MSF, we have a big power of advocacy and communications that we have to use, and we have to use also for. And I think we haven't been doing as much as we can and we should on advocating for mental health in Middle East, and this is something that we want to focus more in the upcoming year, and we are already preparing for that. So advocating for with governments and other NGOs to have services, as Sally was saying, I also agree absolutely. I think this is not the era anymore of having generalized mental health services. This is the time for specific services serving specific populations that have specific needs. So this is also something that I think we have to advocate for. The other idea is advocating for mental health staff, because there is still in Middle East no mental health staff, because many fled because they were talented and they were able to fled and they are living in other countries, or because, for example, in many countries we still face a gap in terms of people with specialized clinical background. There are no, in many countries there is still no degrees in psychology and much less in clinical psychology. When they are in some countries, it's more on educational psychology. So advocating also, not just with governments, but with universities on improving this, and also helping with what we can to develop their curriculum. We do some workshops on this. I think it's absolutely fundamental. The other idea is, although I think we need specialized care, we also need to have, as Dr. Yasser was saying in the beginning, we need our physicians to be aware of what is mental health and what should be done in the primary health care. So advocating, providing capacity building at primary health care for people to refer, for people to be able to treat very mild conditions that a physician, a nurse can also help and can support someone with this issue. It's another important relevant topic for advocacy, and also the provision of medication, because in many places we still do not have medication available when people need. So this is a big part of it. The other issue that I think NGOs have leverage is on capacity building. On capacity building, we have the capacity to absorb a lot of knowledge that is developed around the world to adapt in structured models that make sense for that community in that place. So bringing that knowledge, I think it's something very crucial. The other idea that I think NGOs have to also do their path, it's exactly the opposite, is learning from local, regional, country organizations how to handle mental health, how to handle specific populations to integrate in our models of care. So this is for me absolutely fundamental, and this is for me the work that we should be developing. So I would say that beyond providing care, because I think when we are in a place, we try to do our best to provide the best care possible. But I think our biggest, when we exit, what we will leave behind, I think it's this advocacy work that we will do. Obviously, a lot of people that we cared for and we treated. A lot of professionals that we did capacity building directly within our teams, but also with other organizations, and adjusting our models of care from what we hear, from what we receive from local, regional, and country organizations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So we have come to the end of this roundtable. I'm sure there are so many other things that we could have developed. I still want to give you that famous golden minute, but that means a minute, really. If you want to highlight something, have a reflection on the impact of COVID, or on why is this dimension, mental health, important for development. So we'll use it as a conclusion of what this before the end of this roundtable. So we start from Cairo. Go ahead, Sally.
I think, as I mentioned before, I think with the COVID issue, maybe we learned a bit to slow down. We learned a bit to reflect, and maybe on the importance of mental health. The groups we are running, we help people actually dig deeper into their own grounding skills, slowing down, doing things to soothe themselves, to go back to their own self and spirituality, things like gardening, things like family activities. It's just like slowing down overall, learning to seek help, learning to breathe even properly, learning to connect back again to the earth in you and maybe the Gaia in you, and whatever spirit there is to continue, especially resilience. So resilience, I think, is something that we all learned from this COVID-19 drastic problem we're in. I still believe in stepped care approach for the general mental health issues, and I still believe that we need to keep at it, training on every level in the community, really, to be able to support each other. One thing I think I also dream of is the caring of carers. And I've noticed that in caring for carers is like, I noticed that during the COVID as well, is that a lot of people in the mental health sector or the health sector in general, we care for everybody, but actually we don't have someone to look after us or even talk to or anything. So a lot of networks of support have been created because of the COVID, and we are supporting each other more now, listening more, less of a stigma for everybody. And I think the idea is this network of support, everyone supporting the other, will be the way forward. And I'm thinking this is the best thing I take from whatever has been happening the past year.
Thank you very much. Dr. Yasser, your golden minute.
What I should say, I think during the last year, the international community at large experienced, the population, the humanity experienced part of what we are living under in Gaza Strip, which is the blockade, the restriction on movements. Of course, I wish the best for the humanity, and that this our fight against the pandemic is going to end soon, and that we are going to win it. We are going to win it, inshallah. There is no question about that. But I wish that we end it very soon and that we win that battle very soon. But in the same time, I would like to ask the international community to add more pressure, because we also want to end the blockade on Gaza Strip. And perhaps we want also to end the occupation as soon as possible. But let's begin with ending the movement restrictions and ending the blockade. Thank you.
The blockade, a little bit of air and oxygen for all of you Gazans. One last word from Ana Marquez.
Look, my last word is going pretty much in line with what Sally said. I think something that we have been speaking a lot is on the prevalence of mental health conditions in Middle East. What we also have to say is that most people actually overcome this. No, most people, even living in very difficult positions and going through very potentially traumatic experiences, they are resilient and they overcome. And I think we also have to start passing these messages that our models of mental health care have to be much more focused on resilience or on development, as we have other people saying than this. So it's absolutely fundamental to... Hello?
Yes.
Sorry, because I had a cut here. So it's absolutely fundamental for us to develop from resilience and from development, and to work with people in the communities from this sense. And this is absolutely, and it's not just about what clinicians, what psychologists, what psychiatrists do, but it's taking care of the populations that we work with this sense of healing from a general point of view. We want people, whenever they go through one of our guards, our receptionists, when they face our people more and more in the community, our staff, that there is this sense of healing in the work that we do and how we relate to people, because this is the primary safe space. This is the primary security space that allows people to recover, is to have this human approach to care. And this is where I hope that MSF is going, and the global mental health movement is also going. Healing has an overall experience.
Thank you very much. Well, as mentioned in the introduction to the roundtable, the WHO has acknowledged the important role of what we have been discussing by the inclusion of mental health in the Sustainable Development Goals. We know that depression is one of the leading causes of disability. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among youngsters of 19 to 29-year-olds. People with severe mental health conditions die prematurely due to preventable physical conditions. So we have said that there is a need for increased investment in all fronts, from mental health awareness to increase the understanding and reduce the stigma. Also efforts to increase the access to quality mental health care and effective treatments. Also research. We haven't really spoken about that research so much because we have been dealing really with the on-the-ground fight against the mental disorders, but there is also a need for research. So I think we have got a very complete view and panorama. We know we haven't developed examples on the other side of the Arab world, that is the Maghreb, the western side. But I mean, definitely we cannot do everything. But we were, when we organized this at Casa Árabe, we really wanted to concentrate on this issue of mental health, to be able to hear from the practitioners, from the people who are at the front line. And I think with our three guests today, Ana Marquez from MSF, Sally Touma, psychiatrist based in Cairo, and Yasser Abu Jama in Gaza, we have really managed to get an interesting picture of what we have today. I personally thank you all three, not only for agreeing to do this roundtable, but for the work that you actually do within the difficult circumstances that you work under. So shukran gazilan and muito obrigado. Thank you very much again. And we wish to be speaking more about this also more often, to make it more visible to the world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.